Hello, welcome to Season 7 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. In each episode, we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season, our theme is the current state of horror. We'll be watching 20 or so movies from the last couple of years, reviewing them like normal, and then also talking about some of the larger trends we see. If you want to see the list and follow along, check out our website at thehorrific.com. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. So, when we were talking about this movie before, you said that it looked, or reminded you of the Babadook?
Yeah, from the preview, it definitely reminded me of Babadook.
I have now decided that comment is racist against white people that talk funny.
Yeah. Hmm? No, it is.
Sweeping generalization.
Yeah, absolutely.
But sometimes the world's just easier to process if you can put people in boxes, am I right?
Yeah. I can't wait. Okay, well, this ties into it. Here's my first note. Here's what the first thing I wrote down for this movie.
Okay.
I can't tell if this movie called for big-eared, ugly kids to play Chris, or if it's just the best they could find in Ireland.
Damn.
You want to hear the second one?
Dude, you came out swinging on this one. Okay.
I can't tell if the movie called for ugly women to play the mom, or if that's just the best they could find in Ireland.
Wow, I really feel like I know exactly the way your review of this movie is going to go. I'm excited.
No, it's not true. So I was sitting on the ground, I had my notebook on the coffee table, my back was resting against the couch. Katie was sitting behind me, and I could tell she was trying to read my notes. Mm-hmm. And so I was just trying to think of like the meanest thing to write down.
Gotcha.
And it did work, because she's like, why are you writing that down? Yeah.
That's awesome. Just another date night at the Elzon house.
Yeah. Me trying to insult the whole, I guess, would that be a country of Ireland?
Yeah.
Just a space.
We just lost our one Irish listener.
Good.
It was never going to work out anyway. Yeah, so speaking of like date night, remind me, I got a story to come back to later on.
Hey guys, I just wanted to add a little snippet here. What happened before this was strictly for jokes. I hope no one took offense to it, and if you did, I apologize. I was trying to make not only myself laugh, but my wife and Daniel. One of my favorite things to do in this podcast is to say the craziest things possible just so I could hear his signature laugh. I've been doing it since I was a kid, and it's going to continue to happen. Anyway, I hope you all take it easy. Get back here. Welcome. Here you go. Welcome back to the show.
But not to be taken off course from our mission, we are here this week to talk about the movie The Hole in the Ground from 2019. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to introduce it, and then you'll give your facts, and then we'll get into it.
Sounds great.
In 2019, A24 brought us The Hole in the Ground, an Irish supernatural horror film written and directed by Lee Cronin. This movie tells the story of a woman and her son who move to an old house in the woods to start a new life after leaving the boy's father. While there, they encounter strange neighbors in a giant sinkhole deep in the forest. As time goes on, the mother notices increasingly strange behavior from her son and starts doubting many things around her. This movie has generally received middle-of-the-road reviews and made a little over $3 million at the box office. It can currently be streamed for free for Prime members on Amazon Prime Video.
Perfect.
It was really hard to, not give away the ending. Which I don't know why I don't, because we talk about the ending later.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Just do it, man.
Yeah. Next time I might.
Yeah.
So what did you learn about this movie?
So this movie actually had quite a few, or it didn't have very many facts that I could find.
Yeah.
It seemed like it's the most popular film out there. So I could only find a couple, and honestly, they weren't that interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I just figured we'll just skip the fun facts for this movie.
Gotcha. Yeah, I had a really hard time finding stuff about it as well. And even though it made like over $3 million at the box office, a pretty small fraction of that was in North America. So a lot of people around here, like on the sites that we would normally look at, I don't think have seen it. So it's actually kind of cool that it's free for streaming on Amazon. You know, people can, there's like no barrier of entry beyond like the Prime membership, which I think a lot of people have. So it's definitely, in my opinion, worth checking out. But I mentioned A24 did the distribution in the United States. And so they are, we've talked about before, they tend to pick up projects that are really kind of different or weird. And so this one, it actually seemed almost like normal for an A24 movie to me.
Yeah.
Like it didn't seem as like super weird. But it was I thought a decent horror movie.
No, yeah, I was actually really, really happy with it. Which is, I didn't necessarily expect it going into it.
Mm-hmm.
Katie ended up falling asleep on the couch, and so I was just kind of like zoned out watching it, and like it, like by the end of it, when Katie woke up, she asked how it went. I was like, actually, I'm like, we'll have to watch this again.
Yeah,
pretty happy with it.
Yeah, and it was for something that I had never heard of before we started looking at, best horror movies from the last few years. I saw this one pop up on a couple lists, but all of the reviews that I saw about it were really, like a 5 or a 6 out of 10. It wasn't even like it was super hyped, but just some people like whose taste I would trust. Like the movie lists that they made, the other stuff on there I knew that I liked, and so seeing this too made me think it was worth checking out. But
yeah, I was definitely happy that you put it on the list, because I didn't know anything about it until we were watching the previews for the bigger list to try to narrow it down, and decided to give this one a shot.
Yeah.
It was also placed good in the list.
Yeah, for sure. And this one, so we started with Hereditary, and then we had Mother and Ma and Lady World, and this one definitely almost felt like a return to tradition. Because with Ma and Mother and Lady World, those were all kind of different spins on horror. I mean, they weren't just like the kind of straight ahead horror movie. They were a lot more kind of get inside your head, or teen horror that didn't, horror isn't really the focus type stuff.
Right.
But this one, it was kind of a good spooky, creepy child actor horror movie, and it was great.
Yeah, it was. I think for me, it was the fact that it, like you were kind of saying, traditional. I felt like this had a lot of traditional horror aspects of it.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that really, so we kind of start off with filming, and in that sometimes when we do these podcasts, I think the only major complaint I had about the major. Now you're talking to old Tom here, so I got complaints, but the only major one was just at times it just seemed like the movie was too dark.
Yes, I agree.
It was, you couldn't really see what was going on, and I thought to myself, maybe it was just made for you to watch in complete darkness, which obviously it would help the ambiance of watching a horror movie. But we had a candle lit, and I kept seeing the reflection of the candle in the TV because it was so dark, and it was just okay.
Yeah. No, I think you're onto something with that, and back to you saying that this felt like very traditional. And I think something that we've seen a lot in current horror movies, because that's sort of the theme of this season, is we're watching recent horror movies and talking about things they have in common, is that they really lean hard on their influences. and it almost feels like there are like film elements that are refined down to, this is a thing we know is scary, so we're going to incorporate it in the movie.
Yeah.
And so, even when it first started off, there was like the ambient creepy music and the overhead shots while driving through the forest, and then the camera turns upside down. I know we've seen that exact thing in the intro of another movie recently. I just can't remember which one it is. But
The Shining?
Yeah.
Yeah, The Shining had that.
I forgot about... Yes, that's what it was. But that's just like... Everything about that intro, it was just like, yes, this is established horror movie setup.
Yeah, right.
And it's not... It doesn't feel like cliche in the way that they're doing, but it's like there are elements to it that are just sort of known. It's almost like over the course of time, as an audience, we've been conditioned to know this is the setup for a horror movie. Now prepare yourself for it,
Yeah.
And so there were several places where it kind of did that type of thing, but it did it well. It wasn't like it made it feel predictable or anything. But like there was the scene with sort of the funny, endearing dialogue between the mother and the son in the car, followed by the mom, look out, and then she has to swerve, and then you don't know if she's hit a deer or what. Like, just like the beginning of Get Out or any other movie with a car that we've seen recently. And then there was like that fake out scare when the mom's in the basement with the flickery light, and then you hear Chris yell from upstairs. Yeah. And then it turns out it's just a spider. It's like the fake jump scare. The tone and production make you think something dangerous is going to happen, and then the kid yells off screen, and then everything's fine, but you're still kind of like on edge from it. And it's just a lot of. I almost think of it as like paints on a palette. That they're using, like, these are the things that we know make audiences feel creepy, and so this is what we're using to like build this story in this movie.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, I mean, I know that not all horror movies use those, like, conversation, almost hit a person in a car, that you were just talking about. I think it's okay to do that, though, as long as it's, I mean, it's almost like a run upstairs instead of running out the front door
right,
kind of thing. But in this situation, like, I knew that we've seen it before. Like, I've seen, like, specifically talking about the car scene, I knew that we'd seen that before, but it was just, there was just something with this one where you saw the creepy lady with her lips were real kind of creased, like what smokers get after years of smoking.
Yeah, I was going to make some kind of joke about her almost hitting the Emperor from Star Wars, but you haven't seen Star Wars, so you wouldn't get the joke.
Yeah, that's true. But anyway, so I mean, just seeing that, it was something that we've seen before, but it's still like, okay, well, it worked. Like, it still worked. It wasn't done in a way that, like, kind of threw me off or pissed me off. But
yeah, definitely.
Another thing that I think that they did, kind of tying into this, so it's not how they shot the scene, it was the music that was playing throughout some of it, and it really reminded me of Insidious.
I can see that. Yeah,
those sharp sounds that are playing when, I don't know how to kind of explain it, but it's almost like it's a violin doing sharp keys just like up and down. I don't know. And it almost seemed like they used the Insidious soundtrack as far as like the ambiance, like the sound.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I don't know how to describe it either, but yeah.
Yeah. So the soundtrack, if you guys watch Insidious in this, is very similar, except for it's not playing Tiptoe Through the Tulips. This one's not. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely seemed like they borrowed it, but it didn't do anything to where it frustrated me. It was just like, it seemed like, and I don't know if it's because we just got done watching Lady World or Ma, because we got done watching a couple horror movies, but should I say lame horror movies? But it was just like, this seemed refreshing to me. Like, it kind of, like, when we were done, I was just pretty happy with it.
Yeah, and even just kind of with like the pacing or the way the story was laid out, if you think about movies like The Conjuring or Paranormal Activity, where you have sort of the really intense scenes at night where it's dark and scary things are happening, and then it's daytime, and that's when the characters go off and investigate and reveal more about the story, or talk to a doctor or a priest or whatever, and then that night is coming again and you don't know what's going to happen next. Like, this movie definitely used that as well, which I thought was effective, but it wasn't like that was the whole movie. There was lead up to it and then sort of the big finale piece, but and then it took like a descent turn towards the end, which I didn't really see coming.
Yeah, I didn't either.
So,
yeah, I think, like I was saying, my main complaint was just about the movie being dark. I didn't have too many complaints, and I've talked about this before, but when I watch a movie that I enjoy, I tend to take less notes because I'm kind of focused on the movie. But I was enjoying this one, but I was trying to still take notes to be a better podcaster. Not for me, but for you, because I gotta keep up. And so this is how it went down. Okay. Just for example, I'll just say 3 lines that I have. So it goes bam, bam, bam. Nightmare kitchen scene, gnarly. Theater scene, gnarly. Every scene is intense. I was trying. I was just kind of focusing on the situation. So that should talk about this movie. I feel like this movie also could be categorized in like the same type of horror movie as like Babadook and like It Follows.
Yeah,
it kind of reminded me of a little bit. What was the other? You said The Descent, not because the cave, just the kind of ambiance of that movie as well. Yeah, tone. I felt like this movie specifically was really focusing almost on the mood of the scene. So like you see the mom realize that it's not that Chris isn't her son, but instead of kind of cowarding down to it, she faces it kind of. I mean, there's obviously the intense scene between her and Chris when some things are going down, but she faces it full on you're not my son. And when she does that, the acting right there, I was really kind of happy with, because it went from the mom kind of almost being scared to all of a sudden I've had enough of this. Yeah, you're not him, and that whole battle ensued. But
yeah, and I actually thought that was kind of interesting, because one thing that we've talked about with basically every movie we've watched this season is sort of the psychological aspect of the character doubting their own sanity or other people doubting their sanity. And so the mom is doubting herself and goes to the doctor and is getting the medicine and thinks that she's having some kind of anxiety episode or something, and it seems like she's not really confident about even what she's seeing or thinking or feeling. And then she has the talk with Noreen's husband, whose name I can't remember, but it was the guy from Game of Thrones, and they're talking about how Noreen basically went crazy and thought that her son wasn't her son and all this other stuff. And so you're definitely led to think that the mom is having some sort of mental episode, so you don't know whether to trust it or not. And I think that she also doesn't know whether or not to trust it. But like you said, the point comes where she's like, no, I know what I believe and what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing, and I'm not going to try and hide it or pretend anymore. I've got to do something about this. And so that was kind of a neat twist, just as far as from a story perspective, because it could have gone a different direction. It could have gone that she just doubled down on the medicine, or any number of other things.
Yeah, I was actually really glad that you brought that up, the mental health, because yet again, this is another one that obviously has it with her being prescribed the medicine for anxiety, and it's something I don't know if I would have thought of like before, like you brought them up this season. I mean, it's almost been every kind of episode that something like this has happened. But with movies, you definitely don't want your hand held too much throughout it. And I think with this one, I thought it did a good job as far as you had trouble kind of telling, like, is the mom the one that's going to be going crazy, or is it the kid? Yeah. And the reason what helped that is the old lady who ran her son over. Like that kind of helped you think, well, maybe it could be the mom. And then you slowly see Chris kind of like descend into like, crazy, whatever it was, demon or what. But and
I think that they had like super intense scenes to support both sides of that. You know what I mean? To like keep you on your toes as far as trying to figure out. And one of my favorite scenes in the movie was when the mom is in the woods looking for Chris toward the beginning, and and she just has a flashlight, but the camera is like behind the light, so you can only see where the beam is in the woods, and there's like movement behind one of the trees, and then the music hits, and that was just so intense and so like well shot and set up, because you're like seeing it from her perspective, and she's got this sort of like tough position where her kid, she thinks, is out there lost, but she's also in a completely unfamiliar place, and she can't see what's going on or what's out there. And so that I thought was just a really good like horror setup moment.
Yeah.
And I liked that one a lot. But then she goes back to the house, and he's like, yeah, I'm here, what's up? And so then you're like, okay, well, maybe she's losing it. But then there's the scene where at night she's in the bathtub and she wakes up and hears like the footsteps and the heavy breathing, and she goes and looks under the door to Chris's room and sees him like crawling around and catching and eating the spider. Yeah. And it's like the bones are moving around in his back. And you're like, okay, that child is a monster.
Yeah.
But then you're like, well, but is he, or is this all like her losing it?
Yeah.
And then she has that dream, and this is neither here nor there, but this was just a scene that stood out to me. The dream she had where he shoves his fingers into her scar. Oh, that was so intense and terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the idea that you can use the scene like when she wakes up from the dream, she's looking under the door to see Chris go after the spider.
Yeah.
I mean, that other horror movies have used that before, where you're looking through something, your field of vision's like just small, and all of a sudden something comes in front of your face, and so like that's what you're kind of expecting. So there's a little extra anxiety attached to it, which definitely helps. But then that doesn't happen. She backs off. She hits a crack in the floor, and it creaks real loud, and she goes and hides. Like that's a horror movie scene. I feel like that was a good horror movie scene, like from start to finish. It's almost like that's when it starts to maybe kind of transition to like she's legit afraid of Chris. So one of two things is fixing to go down. It's either going to be comes out that she's the one that lost it, or he's the one that's lost it. I think with that though, the scene that officially kind of deciphered it was the theater scene when she's watching Chris sing, and all of a sudden, like at a school play, and all of a sudden like it zones in and like zones in on her, and she's like watching him, and it's like almost like that's when she realizes like, no, this dude, it's not my son.
Yeah, that was like her moment of clarity about it.
Yeah, and that was it was real creepy, that scene as well, because like his voice started to change, and like he was just deadpan talking to her, which still could have been a dream, but
if I ever had to sit through a children's musical, I would react in exactly the same way.
Yeah, I know. In fact, any children play I go to from here on out, I'm just gonna be looking afraid at one kid only.
Yeah,
like they're
Oh, I just meant I would eventually just yell and run out.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Want nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
You know how I feel about musicals.
I know. Yeah.
So, I guess in the movie there were a lot of questions, like open questions, that maybe would make more sense in retrospect now that we know the ending, but we're meant to think that Chris killed Noreen, right? Like,
yeah, I think
like
so.
other Chris.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the big setup or twist was eventually the mom goes, there's this like big sinkhole in the forest, and you keep seeing like overhead shots of it with creepy music, so you know there's like significance to it. At one point, the mom, after Chris has attacked her and she's drugged him and locked him in the basement, she goes and like goes down through the middle of the sinkhole and is crawling around underneath it, and then encounters almost like an Invasion of the Body Snatchers type scene, where she sees like their bones and skeletons and stuff, but then there's also Chris, the real Chris, is like wrapped up in the roots and dirt. And so she pulls him out, and then she sees these like kind of faceless creatures chasing her, and then she looks back and sees one that looks just like her. And so you're meant to think, I guess, that there are these pod versions of people growing down there, and they are attempting to replace people. And so you're, I guess, supposed to think that Noreen's son, James, had been replaced by one of them, and then they had realized it and, I guess, run over the clone or copy. But then, I guess maybe Chris had fallen in the sinkhole at night or something, and so they had grown a copy of him and sent it up there, but I don't really understand why. But I guess there was unfinished business with Noreen. So what do you think the sinkhole was? Or like, what do you think the significance of all that was?
You know, so with this movie, there was definitely a few questions that came up, and that is one of them that I kind of had as well, because you think like, okay, it's a big sinkhole that's obviously like moving. This can't be the first time that something like this happened. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have to like go into the sinkhole to like, I don't know, maybe the sinkhole could have just I don't know. The honest answer is I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Like, you think Chris fell in there and then found his way down and became like another person became him, or another demon or whatever became him. But the honest answer, I can't necessarily explain that.
Yeah. Well, and I had initially thought, you know, with the Babadook, you didn't really get like a good explanation for what the creature was, but it really just kind of like symbolized the mom's grief and having to deal with that, and also be there for her son and everything. Like, it, in the end, it kind of came together as like a good metaphor for a point that the movie was trying to make. Mm-hmm. I kind of kept waiting for something like that to happen with this one, because the sinkhole really felt more like, you know, it didn't get like super well defined or explained.
Yeah.
So I was trying to figure out, like, well, what's the bigger significance? What's the story that it's trying to tell? What does the sinkhole symbolize? But I couldn't really come up with anything on this one.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes maybe you don't have the deeper meaning.
I did kind of like the ending, though.
Yeah, for sure. Like, starting at when she kills, like, her doppelganger.
Yeah, just like kind of that final closing scene. So she escapes, and then she goes back and gets and takes the real, presumably, Chris with her, and then sets the house on fire where the fake Chris is locked in the basement, and then they drive away. And then at the very end, I guess she's going back to school or something, and he's just outside riding his bike around, and she's like taking pictures of him and then like zooming in on it. And then you see that she's got the mirrors all over the apartment, just like Noreen's house had. Mm-hmm. And Noreen's husband had said, you know, after things happened with their son James, she had examined him every day for the rest of their life to make sure that he was still him. And so, obviously, the mom is now doing that with Chris, and she has that same idea of, he could always turn into something else, and so I've got to constantly be on my guard for it. Yeah. And it was interesting just because it was like they were still able to go about having a somewhat normal and happier life. And it wasn't, just this isolated thing off in the woods anymore. But it was also, like, changed. Like, it would never be normal again.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think the fact that, like, just her kind of taking control of the situation and going, and I think that one of the reasons why it got so bad with, like, her and Chris with moving to the countryside like they did, even though Chris had some questions about it at the beginning, was mainly because it wasn't Chris who she was speaking to. So luckily, after all that went down, they were able to kind of get back to normal in a way. It'd be kind of crazy, though, to have your mom have a whole bunch of mirrors around.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of strange. But the other good thing about this movie was it was only an hour and 30 minutes, too.
Yeah. Yeah. It made it a lot easier to keep up that pace, or like that mood that it was going for.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's like they knew. I felt like this movie was put together with a good plan as far as, like, knowing what they kind of want to do and, making just, like, a good horror film. And I think it was accomplished.
Yeah.
So good on you, people who made Hole in the Ground. Lee Cronin and Steven Shields.
Thank you, A24, for distributing it in North America.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's it. Next week, we will be back with Killing Time while I find my list. Oh, the new Pet Cemetery.
Oh, yeah. I think that's on IMDb or Prime.
Yeah, I think so, too. So,
cool.
We'll delve into the world of Stephen King and see where it takes us.
On the Pet Cemetery.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.